Yep. So tell me if you see anything appear, telling you it's being recorded.
Yeah.
Yes.
I see that now. Thank you, Julia.
No problem.
Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, good.
Great stuff. Okay, well, thank you everybody for coming. It's going to be really, there are two main parts. I know we have an agenda with several bits and pieces, and I'll try my best to stick to it. But really, there are two main parts to this next couple of hours. The first bit is what you can see there, an introduction to content design, and I'll take you through kind of the principles of content design, and also, as much as possible, this is, in some ways, this is quite a general workshop, so it is an introduction to content design as a whole, but where possible, I'm going to try and talk about how we've done it, or how we're doing it for Northants on the two Unitary websites project. And anyone that's working on that project, if you feel like there's a good point to jump in and correct me or add to what I'm saying, then please feel free. And then the second half is about plain English, so it's really about it's like nuts and bolts of writing clear content, and it's quite practical. There are some very exciting activities to get involved, for you to get involved in, and that'll take up the bulk of the second half, really. First of all, though, I'm here on behalf of FutureGov, as Connolly's just said. I'm going to read some things. FutureGov is a change agency on a mission to build 21st century public sector institutions that are catalysts for change in the internet and climate era. At the end of this, we're going to decide how plain English our description of what we are is. We support organisations with digital transformation, service design and community development, building on the best of places to organise for change and radically improve outcomes for communities in the 21st century. And this is kind of like a little mission statement as well. So we believe public institutions are the catalyst for change to radically improve outcomes for communities in the 21st century. Again, we can discuss the merits of the plain English of this later on. In practice, of course, that means actually changing things and working with public sector bodies, local councils, other public sector organisations, central government to kind of make things better, whether that's products, services, most often using technology to try and improve things. You can see there's like a variety of like areas that we've done that in various organisations that we've worked with. Most importantly, of course, is what we've done in Northants. So we spent the first 3 months of this year building 2 websites. So I'm assuming that there is that most of you know what's been happening with the websites and the fact that we're transferring the various existing websites, of which there are several, into these 2 Unitary websites, which of course are now live. And we've been using, we went quite quickly. From a content point of view, I think that Stephen and David would agree. We went pretty quickly, and we maybe didn't do all of the things in the process that I'm about to talk about. But part of the thing that we're doing now is to go back and look at how we can do content, create content according to some of the guidelines that we'll talk about in a second. But those are the websites, and they look lovely. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do, there's going to be a lot of me talking, and I apologise in advance, but the first thing we're going to do is to try and answer this question about what is content design. We have a Menti, which is what we use to try and get a bit of interactivity going with these sort of online sessions. So, Connolly, have you got the reins for doing this?
Yes, I do. So I'm just going to send a link in the chat, or you can use your phone to take a picture of the QR code on the screen, and you should be able to get to something called Menti, which is where we're going to capture some of your thoughts. So the code is 36530475. And I'm going to share my screen, so hopefully once you're there, you'll be able to see what you type into your phone, or if you're using another tab on your computer. So there's a couple of questions now, and then we've got a couple of questions at the end.
Okay, so shall I stop sharing my screen, Connolly, just to remind me how Teams works? Is that the best way of doing this? You've done it.
Oh, good. I think I have got it. Oh, I'm sharing it yourselves. There we are. So we've got 2 people on at the moment.
Yeah, so this is really just for if we were in a room, I would be asking you to throw post-it notes at me, and I would put them all on the wall. So this is our digital equivalent of doing that. So it's just to get a sense of what people think we're about to talk about. Wow, it's exciting. Look at that, it's lovely. And if anyone feels like they want to turn their microphone on and explain their word or their thoughts, that's fine. But we are very early in this session, so I don't mind if you don't want to. Okay, there's actually some really interesting stuff here. And of course, throughout the next couple of hours, there are no right and wrong answers. There is really, there's no perfect way of writing anything or creating any kind of content. It's all guidelines. Okay, so there's lots of things like structure and layout and visuals, which are really interesting. Accessibility, user-friendly, that's definitely on the list. It moves around a lot, doesn't it? So I assume that the larger ones, Connolly, are they the ones that people have said more than once?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
So it's navigation, informative, layout, structure, user-friendly, information, clarity, and accessibility. So you've got about 25, which is about just over half of those on the call. So you feel free to continue adding your questions in. There's one more question that we have, so you should have this pop up on your screen. We just want you to ask yourself if you agree or strongly disagree with these statements. We just want to get an understanding of where and how you work with content. So if you work with a team, if you work on your own, if you do all three, if it's in your job description, or if you just do it because you like it. So give this another couple of minutes. We had 4 people respond very quickly. Thank you very much.
Apart from it being baking hot in this shed this morning, the other fun thing that's happened over the last 24 hours is that my chair the mechanics in it have stopped working. So that over the course of the next couple of hours, I will gradually start to get lower and lower every now and again. Try not to point and laugh.
It looks like we've got most people who are dialing in to the workshop are working on content on a daily basis. Yep. Content is a part of their job description, and they also support teams who create content. So this is
it's a good mix.
This is great, really good mix. So I think there's a thank you slide. So we're going to be back at the same code a little bit later. But for now, Ian, if you could take over sharing your screen.
Yep, let me see if I can get back to. Nope. Hang on. Sorry. 1 second. I think it's because I'm on presenter mode. 1 second. Okay, so that was really interesting, especially some of the comments around like kind of layout and structure, because those things are actually part of content design, and I think a lot of people think about content design. I think I probably would have expected more people to talk about writing, just like the mechanics of writing, things like plain English, clarity, that kind of thing, which is also true, but the thing about layout and structure and all of those other kind of extra bits, which you would typically associate with kind of something more visual kind of person, a designer in the more conventional sense, they are important too. And really it's about being able to kind of see the bigger picture. So this is kind of a definition of content design. So a way of understanding what information people need and how to provide that information in the right way at the right time. So this idea of need is going to come up over and over again, as you'll see in the next few slides. So content design, really, it is just a way of working, and I think it's important to say that, because it's also quite flexible. because there are things. What I'm going to talk about here is kind of the ideal. Like this is kind of what was written down in a book, and that's great. But there is obviously, with all projects, there is some reality that you always come up against, and we definitely found that in our project with you in Northants. And that's fine. I think what we have to try and remember is that it is actually just an approach, it's a mindset, a way of working, and that's okay. It's collaborative, so it's not a case of like if you're a writer or a copywriter, then you get given a brief and you sit on your own and you write it and then you give it back to someone else and it's gone. Content design really is a collaborative effort. It involves a number of people. You have like a whole research phase where you need to work with other people to find out what it is you need to do with your content. So it really is about working together. Importantly, it's evidence-based, so we use data a lot to decide what content we create. We'll come on to that. It's a really good conversation starter, especially I think when the term was first coined. It was a real way of people thinking, hang on a minute, what's that? Is it different to just like writing? And it's in some ways it makes it sound a little fancier, which is good. It's good in the sense that it makes people like listen. So if you're a writer and you want people to say, actually, this content is important, the way it's written is important, it's good for that. But most importantly, it's all about the user. And I'm going to use the word user because that's what people use. That's what we've been using for the last 3 or 4 months. It isn't particularly friendly. Like most of the time you would prefer to say people, but actually in this context, a user, we mean someone who is using, in our case, it's the website for Northants, but it's whoever is using the thing that you're creating the content for. So a user is really just the person who uses whatever you're doing. But content design is really all about them. And that's because this is the key sentence. It's about what users need and not what we want. And the we here is kind of the organisation. So for us, it's obviously the council, whichever one you're in, the north or west. It's not about what you want. You always have to focus on what users need. So whenever you come to create a piece of content, it's having the user in mind. It's the idea of a kind of a human-centered, like a user-centered approach to design, which we've talked about for years, but in terms of like the visuals and all that kind of thing. But really now it's about the content, the specifics of what is written or created in terms of content. So some examples of that. These are really simple examples, and these are things that we've had to think about as we've been putting together the websites, and these are the kinds of things, the user needs that we'll be looking to provide content for over the next 2 years as we, or as the team, put together content from each service area. But things like paying council tax, that's a specific thing, that's a need. Someone needs to come to the website and pay council tax. So what content can we create to make that as simple and as easy as possible? Find city cycle routes, claiming benefits, and seeing when bins goes out. So those are really common ones, but there are more obscure ones that you might come across. So it's about finding out what those are and always having those in mind. And it is more than words. So again, this is interesting to go back to that the activity we just did. When we talk about content, quite often, certainly historically, it's always been about words. It's been about writing. You get a copywriter to write the content. You get a designer to do the pictures. But actually, as a content designer, really, it is more than words. It's about like looking at, okay, what does a user need? They want to pay their council tax. Okay, what's the best way of doing it? Is it a paragraph or is it an image? Whatever. So an example of this, just to show you. So this is the slightly adapted, so don't panic, this is not live right now. This is a slightly adapted version of the West website now. So we had to create a homepage, and here it is. And this is something that we could have done. So we could have had the focus on the council itself, and we could have said, like, we are a forward-thinking council, we do services and we're awesome. And we could have made the first thing people can do, apart from the search, is to like read our blog. But that makes it all about us. Obviously, that's a very exaggerated example, but you still see lots of this kind of thing everywhere, where people forget that people who are using the site actually need to do something. So it's less about us as an organization, more about the person using it. So this is the actual website, and just to, I've just my sign of kind of not particularly graceful arrows here, just point out some of the key differences. So all killer, no filler. So you can see the top left-hand corner here, the search box. It's extremely simple. Like we initially, like I initially wrote a sentence that was underneath that, and quite rightly the team said we don't need that sentence, and we removed it. And now it's just the information that people need. So when people come to the site, we know that on council websites people love to search. So that's why we have this really prominent search box. Rather than having a paragraph or a sentence about ourselves, these three boxes here, that's based on the actual data. That's evidence-led. The decisions put those three things there. These are the things that people most commonly want to do or find out about when they come to the website. So that content is positioned in this here in the hierarchy, the structure of the site. Excuse me. The image. That image is there like that because users, people, the public in the testing that we did told us that they wanted one, and they felt it helped them connect to the place, that kind of thing. So that's in there for that reason. And then council services, get to the good stuff. It's a council website. The research shows that people just want to come and they want to do their thing and then they want to leave. And so that's why the design of the site, the structure of the content reflects that. So you can see just from that top half or even top like eighth of that particular page, there are lots of content decisions. I mean, they're kind of design decisions as well, as in visual design decisions, but it's a collaborative process. Ultimately, these are all different types of content, but they're all there for a reason, and they're all there because we think that they're best for the user, if that makes sense. So again, it's thinking about what meets that particular need. If someone wants to know what the VAT rate is, which is an example I'll show later, what's the best way? Is it words? Could it be a video? Could it be infographic, etc., etc.? A postcode checker, for example, in the context of our websites. As a content designer, which is different to a copywriter, where you would just get a brief and then you would do it, the designer actually stops, thinks, looks at the evidence, thinks about, looks at the research, basically has a big old think about what's the most appropriate way of meeting that particular need, and then from then that's when they start creating, but it won't always necessarily be words. So these are the four official phases of content design. So the phrase content design itself, I think, was first coined by Sarah Richards, who worked in kind of the original, I think it was the original GDS team in central government. So it was a big part of all of that. She's written a fantastic book, which I should have included a slide of. I've probably got it here somewhere. It's behind me somewhere. It's a fantastic book, so if you're interested in any of this, I recommend you go and read it. But these are the official four phases. I say official because we've adapted these slightly for what we need in Northants, which is fine. Like these are not rigid things. It's again, you come up against the realities of putting a project together. It's about choosing the bits that you can do best and the bits that you can leave, that kind of thing. But for this workshop, I'm going to go through the official. So discovery, user stories, creating content, and then review. So does anyone have any questions so far? Quick water drink. Bearing in mind, I can't see anybody shaking their head or anything like that. So I'm going to definitely.
I'm looking at the chat and I don't think there's any questions. A couple of people have had slides. I've got one person, I think it's George, suggesting that you should replace the gas cylinder in your chair. But no questions as such. Just Rich is saying really good, Ian.
Fantastic. That's all I need to know. If anyone wants to put more comments like that, that's also fine, as well as questions. I suspect the gas cylinder will cost probably more than the chair did, so maybe I'll just get a new chair. Okay, so the discovery. So this is kind of the first phase, and again, this is really the important distinction between content design and kind of. And I am a writer, so I'm careful about my words, but just being a writer or a copywriter in the more traditional sense. This is the main difference. And it really is not particularly complicated. It's just the idea that you do some research and you find out what people actually want before you start writing or putting content onto your website. So this discovery phase, which I'm sure that most of you will have heard of this as a phrase. Again, not particularly plain English, but I'm not in a position to change that. But this is a period of research carried out right at the beginning of a project, and it's where you collect all of those user needs, all of the things that you think that a person using your website might need to do, and you create like a big list of them. And the idea is that if you actually meet all of the needs of those people, the people that will need to use your site, then it will actually ultimately it will benefit your organization as well. Those two things are effectively come hand in hand. They're not separate. So what do you do? How do you learn about your users? What are you trying to find out? So what language they use is really important. We're going to talk about plain English later, which is really about making things sort of clear and straightforward and appealing to lots of people. But you have different audiences, and you do need to know what types of the way that they speak, the things that will appeal to them, and also how they behave. So what kind of what kind of things what kind of mental models they have, what kind of things do they typically look for, what kind of things what feedback have you got that has told you that they behave in this particular way. I have an example of that in a second. It's like that one between like disabled parking and blue badge. What do people actually search for? So it's actually, you know, it's a parking permit, but people really search for blue badge. So that's like how they behave. What are their needs? That's fairly straightforward, but also which needs are most important. And that last one, again, just to throw a bit of current context. So we have done this process. It was actually right at the start of the project. I wasn't part of it, but like everyone got together and we kind of wrote down user needs for the entire website before we did the first phase of the project, or 2 websites, sorry. Now, as the content team are about to go back to service areas, we've kind of looked at it and thought, actually, we don't really have the time or the amount of people on the project to go through every single service area and write down a list of every single interaction that people might do, because some of them are probably really obvious, and there just isn't kind of the time on this particular project and project team to do that. So one of the things that we are doing instead is we're going to work with service areas to go, okay, right, we think we know what the needs are in general, but which ones are the most important? What do we absolutely have to make sure that we get right in terms of content? So so how might you do that? Again, so this is quite general. We haven't necessarily done some of these things on this particular project in Northants, but these are things that you can do, but because they haven't been like appropriate and we haven't had the time and that kind of thing. But one way, if you wanted to find out about your site, is obviously to speak to people who use it. So phone interviews, you can run co-design workshops, which is just where you get a load of people in a room from different walks of life who might want to use your site, and then you present them a design problem and you figure it out together over the course of a day or so. You can even scout around forums. Maybe there's a local forum in Corby, I don't know, where people are talking about their problems. I bet there is. There's almost definitely one of those, isn't there? Or social media. So just kind of get an idea of what kind of problems people have, and that can help too. And then, as I just said, for us on this particular project, we're kind of in the process of agreeing that priority content that we talked about. Things like forms, transactions, and payments are really important. It's a council website. People just want to do stuff. So we're really kind of going to be focusing on that when we're working with service areas, but also like looking for like potential problems, like what are the things that are going to hold us up. And what kind of things do we need to expect? It's about preparing ourselves for things that might happen when we get the content by working with service areas. Another way to try and work out what those user needs are and to figure out what the heck you need to create in terms of content is to consult the data. So again, this is a really big distinction between this and kind of more conventional copywriting. If you're a copywriter, you might do a bit of this, but actually most of the time you're answering a brief that's been given to you by someone terribly important, and they've said, right, we want to do this because we think it's the best thing for our organization or our business. And as a copywriter, you can kind of go, I disagree with you, but you've given me the brief, I shall do the job, and here it is, you hand it back. Whereas if you're a content designer, the idea is that you go, well, hang on a minute, let's just check if that's a load of nonsense that you're talking. Obviously, you need to pluck up the courage to do that if it's someone terribly important. But you say to them, right, no one is doing that. No one is coming to our site looking for that thing that you've asked me to write about or the content you've asked me to create. So you can look at the analytics of the website. What do people actually come to your site? Which pages are the most visited? We've been using heat maps using a tool called Hotjar for our user testing for the project here in Northants, and that's really useful too. So it basically just shows you where people are clicking and moving around the page. You can do a survey, really straightforward way of doing it. Just put together a good survey and send it out to people. Google Trends is really interesting. I'll mention an example of how you can use Google Trends later on. And any existing research. So when we go to service areas over the next few months, we'll be saying, like, have you got any of this stuff? Does this stuff already exist? Or it might be that we present stuff. So we might go and say, we've got these heat maps that says this is how people are using the site. But basically, it's trying to use actual data to make decisions. And the idea is that removes you and the terribly important person, or whoever it might be, from the conversation. Because there is no argument to have. You can't kind of say, well, this is definitely what people want if the data says, well, it's not. It really isn't. So in that way, it kind of removes like egos in some way, and it puts like the user, the person who uses the website, back in front of the conversation, which is kind of good for persuading people as well. So the idea of it being persuasive is good, because sometimes you can have reluctance from senior people. They can say, well, no, I really do want to do what I said. But actually, if you've got the data, it can really persuade people. It's, again, it kind of takes you out of the equation. Oops, where am I? Here we go. So this is the example I was just mentioning before. So and the hydraulic fracturing or fracking is the example used in the content design book, which is why I mention it here. So using Google Trends and Google Analytics, there was the example, as the example goes, this is kind of the famous one. Hydraulic fracturing, up until a point in the kind of noughties, I guess, was what people searched for. And if you were into that kind of thing, that's what you would write on your website. But then the term fracking suddenly became more commonly known. It was in the news, and it was the word that people became familiar with. And so searches on like if you had a council website for any reason with this on a page about it, or if you were an energy company, I guess, people searching for those words just completely went the opposite direction. So people stopped searching for hydraulic fracturing and people were searching for fracking. So in that case, you need to make sure that your content actually is in line with what people are searching for. And that's based on the data. So good example. And for us, it could be disabled parking or blue badge. I mentioned this earlier. So there's a very good chance when people come to our sites or the Northants sites is that they might search for disabled parking, as I've got in this example here. But the reality is they're going to search for blue badge as well, one or the other. I think for us, they'll probably search for one or the other, as opposed to having that kind of that change with the fracking example. But we need to make sure that that appears in the first entry as people search. So again, it's just thinking about how people actually use the site and using that data to kind of inform the content. So the reason that that appears at the top of this page here, top of the search results here for disabled parking, is because you can see we have those keywords in the description there. And here is a quote from Sarah Richards in her book. So everything we do from a content perspective is based on a number or some research or some discovery or something from somewhere. It's not just sitting down and writing something. And that's like the key distinction between content design and something like copywriting, as I said. So here's another example. So I just Googled this last night. I just Googled UK's VAT rate, and this was pretty high up actually. So they've, well done to Cashflow for the SEO. It was on the first page. This might be one way of dealing with this user need. So if the user need is a person needs to come to the website and find out what the VAT rate is in the UK, lots of people will be doing this. We could present the content like this, like as a council or as the government. We could say, okay, well, it sounds like someone needs to know all about the UK's VAT rate. Let's explain it, and it could look like this. I'm just going to squint. Oh yeah, it's there. So in the second paragraph, so the first paragraph under the second heading, it says it's currently 20%, and this is the rate charged on most purchases. What the government team have done, the way that they've approached this, is they thought, well, actually, that's probably the thing that people really want to see. And so they designed this page, the content of this page, where it says the standard VAT rate is 20%, big and bold. And that is kind of a really good example of content design in action. And you can see slightly further down that page, they've got the kind of the different versions of the VAT rate. So if it's a reduced rate or if it's zero rate, not as important as just coming to the page and going, oh, it's 20%, because the vast majority of people will want that information. So yeah, you can see the difference. And that's the difference between like copywriting potentially and content design. Okay, next page. Okay, sorry, it's not registering my clicks. Okay, so I'm going to move on to user stories. So we talked about this a little bit. I'm just going to explain like the mechanics of what a user story is. So the idea is that you go out and do all of this research, you do that discovery phase, you've learned loads about your users. The next phase is to actually put those into kind of plain language that helps you understand what you actually need to do. So a user story is to help your team understand what you need to do, like what needs doing, but it's without telling them how to do it. So it's trying to not have that thing that you have where you're giving, again, we're giving someone a brief and saying, okay, well, people need this, so you need to do this. It's about giving the team like the freedom to think, be analytical, and come up with like a solution themselves. And the key to making it successful is to try and involve as many people as possible. And I say as possible because I know that it isn't always possible. Sometimes you just have to crack on and do things. I do understand that. But ideally, you would work with other people and say, OK, I think this is a good solution. What do you think? And you would get as much input as possible from different disciplines and from different parts of the organization. So why user stories? It means everyone knows what they are trying to achieve. Like it's really clear. There's no kind of tasks that don't make sense. You get an idea of, OK, well, that's what users want. So that's what that's the thing we're trying to do. Reduces duplication and extra work, because once you've done one, you can kind of tick it off. It means that there aren't 10 pages across the site where we answer the question, this is how how do you put your bins out? Gives people confidence in the process. And it allows you to show, as a content designer, it allows you to kind of show your skills and build trust. So having these user stories, having like a collection of needs that you're trying to kind of tick off as you put content together, people can see that that's what you're doing. It makes your work more visible and builds trust and that kind of thing. So this is very much the ideal. So every piece of content should have a user story. A user story clarifies the purpose of your content and helps you know when to stop, which is another important point. I say this is the ideal. I think I've already kind of covered that enough. The idea that sometimes you just have to take this process and bend it to your project and what you need to, what you have, time, resources, that kind of thing. This is what a user story looks like. So the idea is you have a big old list of these in a spreadsheet usually, and the format is as a, and then personal role, I want to, so that. I'm sure lots of you have already seen this before. So to fill this in, here is a user need. As a homeowner, I want to know when plastic waste is collected so that I can put the right bin out on the right day. Very, very common user story for a council website. You can take that a bit further and put a bit more kind of context into it. So as a concerned homeowner that cares about the environment, I want to know exactly how much waste is recycled so that I can decide whether to recycle by other means. So related, so it's related to that particular page. There's a good chance this might be on the same page, these two user stories, but different, like there are different user needs that you need to tick off on that particular page. Every user story has, so these are the things that you would attach to each of these little snippets, these little user stories. So acceptance criteria, so this is the point at which you go, yep, we've done it, that's covered, we've answered that need. The format, so the best way to meet the need, so again, whether it's text, whether it's like a calculator, postcode checker, etc. Performance indicator, so like what's good, how do we know that we've actually done the job? And an archive date, so when is this no longer needed? When can we kind of archive this content and take it off the internet? It could be never, but who knows? So whether we have all of these things for our project, we're yet to see. I would say the way that our approach will probably allow us to do that. So as we cut down our user stories in terms of looking at the prioritizing the ones that are most important for our with each service area, I think is probably a good idea for us to do this kind of thing so that we've got an idea of when everyone agrees that we've done the job. Yeah, so this is just it's the same example, but it's very obvious acceptance criteria for this example is people know when to put the bins out. It's as simple as that. Others are more complex, but it's just an example of like how simple it actually can be. So those performance indicators, the kinds of things that might involve, it could be just page visits. It could be that you want 20% more people to like visit that page. It could be that people spend less time on the page. So that in particular that VAT example would fit really well for there. Like the cash flow, I reckon it probably will take you 10 seconds to find that information. The government, the gov.uk example, probably take you half a second. Or it could be something like halving the number of customer support calls. Okay, we're on to the kind of the making stuff section. So actually creating content, and then in about 3 minutes, we're going to have an activity, which is also a chance to have a drink of water or have a break. So actually creating content. So instead of saying, how shall I write it? You say, what content will best meet this need? So that is another quote. Covered that already. So before you actually do it, some of the things that you might think about, and we've been doing this already. So thinking about like formats. So if you have like a list of, for any reason, like you need to put a list of postcodes. For example, do you create a list of 3,000 postcodes, or might the content you need to create be something like a tool, like some kind of postcode lookup tool, that kind of thing? And again, before you begin, think about those priorities. What does the research say? So always try and go back and look at that discovery phase and what came out of it. And I thought I would just show this. So this is the bin collection day page that we've currently got on the sites. This is the north, but it's on the same, it's on both sites. And this is it. This is the entire page at the moment. Obviously, we will, when we migrated more content over, this will give us more. But we actually had like a problem to solve. Like most of the content for the sites at the moment is on the old sites. We're just linking back to those sovereign sites. But how do we do that gracefully? Because in this example, we have 4 local areas with different information. So how do we like gracefully do that? We could have done the cash flow way of doing it. Cash flow with a K, by the way. I hope you noticed that. We could have done it their way and just like written some paragraphs. And we could have done that for every single page where we needed to send people back to 4 different local areas, area websites. Instead, we created this little tool where people can go, these links here, I don't know if you can, probably can't see my mouse, but the links, Corby, East North Hampshire, Kettering, Wellingborough, those will take you directly to the bin collection information for those councils, for those areas, sorry. And if you don't know where you are, then you can enter your postcode. And so just that little bit of content design there, not only does it save us the hassle of having to write it out every single time, it's used consistently across similar pages. So people who want to do different tasks can get used to seeing that. In some ways, it's a temporary measure for us, but it's actually a really good way, a good example of how we've kind of thought about, used that content design kind of approach and thought about what's the best way of dealing with this particular problem. Plain English. So I didn't really talk about myself at the start, which is probably a good thing because I'm spending the entire time talking anyway, but plain English has always been my thing. It's a big part of content design, mostly because it's about making sure that it's content meets those user needs and it's about the people rather than the organization. But for me, this is my own definition. Plain English really is about understanding your audience and then writing in a way that speaks to them clearly. It's not a particularly complicated definition, but the bit that often gets forgotten is that understanding your audience. And obviously it ties so well into content design because that's what it's all about. So before I carry on with plain English, Connolly's just sent me a message which I didn't manage to read the entire thing, but are there any questions in the, I can't see anything apart from my presentation, so I'm not sure if people are furious about anything or asking questions.
No one's furious at all. David's just put a note in the chat. So I don't know, David, just in case people aren't following the chat and are listening intently to the slides, did you want to update us just quickly of what you've mentioned?
Yeah, I can do. Yeah, this is just a mention for how we're approaching the timeline and moving services over to the new website. So obviously, most of the people on the call will be interested in how it works for them. So mainly due to resource and the kind of the depth we want to go into for some of the priority or the most popular services, we're going to be taking that user stories approach mainly with those most popular services and the ones that affect call volumes to the customer service advisors. But we'll be sharing elements of this with services as we work with them during their part in the timeline, so that's available to go out and do this kind of research yourself if you've already got kind of user groups or some sort of customer base that you're in touch with. That kind of option is open available as well.
Fab, thanks, David.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and part of the reason for doing this workshop is to try and get everybody on board, because the web team, you know, Stephen and David, the content people from North and West, like it's a really small team, and we have across the 2 websites like 1,000 pages, something like that. So the idea that we can go do this process that I'm describing now with the kind of like rigor that I'm kind of suggesting, yeah, it's going to be a challenge. So in any way that if you're in a service area and thinking, well, this is going to be me doing this at some point, any of this that you can do before Stephen and David and the team come along, that would be great. Amazing. Are there any other questions or comments? No. Okay. Well, we're going to be doing the activity very shortly. This is kind of the plain English section. So this is like quite a practical sort of 20 minutes around writing, really. So what plain English most certainly is not, and I say that with a slightly huffy tone on purpose, because I think it's quite often people don't always look especially fondly on plain English. I think that certainly that used to be the case. I think less so now, to be honest, but certainly like quite a few years ago, it was often seen as the things on the right here. So the idea that it was like dumbing down, or it could be like patronizing. Using really simple language was just actually it's just patronizing people, or being pedantic. Like, you know, the whole like, you know, people are just after grammar and commas and that kind of thing, and that's what it's all about. But it's not, and the idea of it being niche as well, like that. I think gradually over the last 20 years or so, it's definitely like just even the phrase plain English or clear language, that kind of thing, has just become a part of what everybody does, especially in government, really. But I think it was previously considered something that was, yeah, really niche and not really something you need to worry about too much. And it's not boring as well. So the other complaints that people often give around plain English is the idea that actually it just makes it really stale and boring. Your language, your writing. I don't think that's the case. For me, I always think about it as like being a foundation. So if you can explain something clearly, that's great. Like that's the most important thing, particularly for like a council website or where you're trying to convey information. But it's after that you can start to add a little flourish. It depends what you're doing and what you're writing for. But like if you've done the most important thing, which is conveying the information, being clear, at that point you can start to kind of add a bit of tone to it, like the tone and voice stuff. So it doesn't need to be super boring, but that is often a complaint. But why do it? Like there are really like three very main reasons. Like it is faster to write once you get the hang of it and you kind of used to doing it, and it becomes part of your everyday practice. It's just quicker. You can spot your passive verbs a mile off and find yourself, you know, not even really thinking about some of the kind of principles that we're going to talk about. It just comes natural. It's definitely easier to read. The whole point of plain English is to try and make it as accessible as possible. That is clear language, not complicated, no jargon. People can just come to a web page or whatever content really, and just read it and understand it. And because of that, it reaches more people, which is of course really important if you are making a website for a council or any kind of organisation, which is about passing on important information. You want to try and reach as many people as possible, so the clearer the better. It also ties in with some just basic web usability principles. Like we know that people don't read every single word on a page, and that's fine. They scan through, and anything you do, whether it's complicated language or, for example, not using headings. So if you see just a big chunk of text, then that's like a holdup. That is like a little barrier that makes it harder. So you have to kind of adjust your glasses and go, okay, right, I need to read this. And even that just split second, like you're off. Like people have gone, like they're not interested. So again, going back to when we started the activity at the start, when we talked about layout and structure, like again, plain English, people mostly would say, oh, that's about writing clearly, and that's true. But it is also about structure and the layout and the way that you look at a page, because it can make a difference whether people stay on the page, but also whether they find the information quickly or not. Any holdup is a problem. So here are the kind of the plain English principles. I've been stealing these from the Plain English Campaign website for 20 years. It's a free PDF, so I assume it's okay that I can just take them. And I paid money to go on one of their courses, so you know, all's fair. Oops! Oh no, I pressed end. Hang on. Don't look. There we go. So these are from the Plain English Campaign, who've been like the authority on plain English for donkey's years. Know your audience that's me adapting their one of their principles actually, but knowing your audience and understanding who you're writing for, really important. Short sentences, use pronouns like I, we, and you, everyday words, use the active voice, give instructions, headings and lists. They're the most important things. I would also add on outlining your writing and getting yourself a system. Outlining your writing for me is really just like, it's just, I'm not going to talk about this, which is why it's grey, but it's just the idea when you come to write a page, let's say it's a page for a website, that you don't just go hell for leather, that you've got all your research, you've got all that stuff that you know you need to do, but like just outline it first, just put stuff in place, build your structure, don't worry about whether it's perfect or not, and get an outline and then go through and do the other stuff. And getting yourself a system, like the documentation, tone of voice, content guidelines, principles, strategy, all that kind of thing, like try and get those things in place. All right, this
just
is
quickly, Ian, before we go, just if you go back to the slide before, I think one of the sections was choose everyday words. And previously we were talking about user stories, and Sarah from the housing team said, this is really helpful. I work in housing and our content is full of legal jargon. I think we have tried to use stories approach without actually being aware that it was, but definitely keen to work with you to develop that more clear. So Sarah, I just came off a 3 months piece of work with Coventry with the housing team, where we focused on, I guess, 2 user groups, those who were people with multiple complex needs, and also those who were able to self-serve. So one of the key things I think that the content designer on the Coventry project did was understand the language and how English actually wasn't the #1 language used by the residents. And so what we tried to do was to try and make things more visual, and also look at different translation services. So one of the things that we did was we actually had the housing staff create a video to actually explain some things that were on either the website or given out in pamphlets, and allow them to understand and set their expectations was the goal of that individual piece of content. So I just thought I'd share that as something that potentially could be done for your team. And I think Ian and I, towards the end of the session, feel free to ask as many questions, particularly about your service or just in general about content design, and we'll share as much as we can within the time frame that we have. But we're going ahead of schedule at the moment, Ian, which is great. Sorry, I just wanted to add that in as Sarah is mentioning things in the chat.
Yeah, it's really common when it comes to stuff with like legal language. People tend to leave the legal language in because it's either it sounds important or because it feels like, well, we couldn't possibly change that because that's the way it's always been done. We'd just done a project with Camden. It was a very small project, so there wasn't an awful lot of time for doing the plain English stuff and really like rewriting things. But as an example, like quite a related example, it was about planning and trying to redo like a site notice. So you know the bits of paper that you see stuck to a lamppost with reams of text that explain there is going to be a development here. What do you think? That no one, not many people read. We're trying to make a digital version of that, and like the first version of it would describe a development as a I probably get this wrong, but it was like a mixed use redevelopment project. And I was like, we asked the users, we said, like, do people know what this means? And like no one said no, not really. People could guess, but not really. So we just changed it to something like, I don't remember the exact words, but something like houses and offices, something like that. It was just like something really simple, and it described what it was. This development was just like there was like a residential bit with houses, there was some shops, that was it. It was like there was a commercial section and there was some offices. So we were like new houses, shops and offices, and it was literally the same thing. But no one had ever, like, because planning officers, they talk about that in their own offices, like that's part of their job. Yeah, it's a mixed development or mixed use redevelopment. But again, that's about changing the focus from like how you talk internally to how people might actually read it. And one of the problems with that particular project was that we were trying to reach, like, basically the problem was people from who don't have English as a first language from different communities just weren't interested in the planning process, or they weren't able to engage with the planning process if they were interested. And that kind of like simple change can make a world of difference. Anyway. Right, onward. So right, this is the really practical section. So to write in plain English, you should write short sentences. I appreciate that sometimes you might go a bit over, that's fine. But if you look to average around 15 to 20 words, then you won't go far wrong. you can usually see on a page quite quickly if a sentence is too long. It kind of jumps out at you. Once you get used to doing this and it becomes like just sort of seeps into your bonds, then you can see it quite quickly that that sentence is too long. And usually the problem is that there is more than one idea going on. So you are trying to squish two ideas into one sentence, and you'll use conjunctions to get these two sentences to go together. But actually, a full stop will probably do the trick. It's not on my presentation, but if in doubt, use a full stop is a good rule of thumb. So average of 15 to 20 words, but also just to make sure it doesn't get boring and stale, it's about like the rhythm, really. Like any good writing in any medium, it's about mixing it up. And a good way of like seeing if it sounds boring or not, if it's got that rhythm, is just to read it out loud. It's lots of fun just reading out council web pages. I'm sure David and Stephen are going to be recording them and selling them as online poetry. So here's an example. So here is a sentence. That to me immediately go, that's too long. So I would. There's no sort of easy way to do this in this session. We're ahead of time, which is a shame. But I would normally say like, what can I do? Where can I put full stop? Does anyone want to shout out how you might make that into into two sentences? I've just realised as well that in my absolute desire, my passion for trying to make that a Spice Girls reference, it should be the other way around, shouldn't it? One become two. That's very disappointing. Does anybody want to come up and just
No, what do you
shout
mean
out?
one become two? Spice Girls references two become one, isn't it?
Well, I know, Ben, I've got it right, but I've relied very heavily on the Spice Girls thing without looking at what I'm actually trying to do. I want to turn one sentence into two.
Oh, got it.
It's a failure on my part.
I'd swap because for a full stop.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Exactly. I mean,
If anyone else wants to put anything in the chat, Amy has got full stop after me and get rid of because, similar thing. And then Sadie says after the me question mark, full stop instead of because, and take out it meant.
Yeah, exactly. That's the other thing that I would normally do in person is like, can we actually make this much shorter as well? Do we need to like, so yeah, full stop would do the trick, but also you could probably remove some words. So I've flipped it around slightly. So that's the way that I would. Well, there is many ways of doing it, but here's an example. So one idea per sentence. That's the key thing, really. Like the first, that is two ideas in one sentence. Here is one idea in each sentence. So the first was learning the principle of plain English is really useful. My writing is clearer. They're two different things. Technically three things about the reaching more people, but yeah, separating them up. Okay, so this is the activity, right? Yeah, this is the activity. So here is a really, really long sentence. And I would like you to spend 5 minutes while I drink some water, just having a look, see if you can rewrite it. So I'll read it out, because why not? Some people seem to think that writing long sentences makes them sound intelligent, but generally speaking, it is actually a lot harder to keep track of what they are saying, and therefore shorter sentences are considered far more preferable. So obviously that's a bit of a daft sentence, but I'll bet if we were to really study our websites, our emails, our Slack messages or Teams messages, I bet we do these kinds of sentences all the time. So Connolly, are you okay to?
Yeah, of course. If you want to put it back on the other slide just for a second, I know there are some people that had some issues with using Menti, so feel free to use the Teams chat, and Fiona will monitor the Teams chat, and then I'll be sharing on Menti. So feel free to either write it down with a pen and pencil, it's my preferred way, and then type it once you want to craft it. But what we're going to do, it's not a competition, but I know there's some competitive people on the call from the website team, but we want to see how you would approach and rewrite this sentence in plain English. So taking some of the principles that Ian has just shared. If you go onto Menti, you should be able to type it straight into the box. If you want to give it a go first time, I'll share my screen in 1 second. In terms of the meeting chat, if you have been following along, I have posted a couple of articles. If you were interested in the Coventry housing example I spoke about, there's insight on the website and more about that. And also in terms of the site notice, I think I've shared the right link to the Camden site notice service engaging communities. So Menti is just offering me a heart reaction. Perfect. Good, Stephen. That's right. It means you're waiting for me to share my screen. So let me share that now. Give me 1 second. So you should be able to see this screen and you should be able to react with a heart, which is exciting. Next, this is the sentence. So if you want to copy that into a notepad, because it will go away when I, so Ian, or if you're going to, do you mind copying the sentence and popping it in the chat so some people have a reference? Because I'm going to go next and it will allow you to see what other people have rewritten. So maybe I just leave this up actually for another 10 seconds or so. So some people seem to think that writing long sentences make them sound intelligent, but generally speaking, it is actually a lot harder to keep track of what they're saying, and therefore shorter sentences are considered more preferable. So all we're asking is for you to just rewrite that for us. And then when you're ready, hopefully you'll be able to enter your sentence structure here. There's no right or wrong answer, but we have prepared a couple of examples for you that we will share when we go back to the presentation. And I'm very sorry if Menti, me sharing my screen, has stopped your Teams from working. So we've got one example at the moment. I've got the Spice Girls song stuck in my head now, Ian, for the entire day, I bet you.
It's a classic. A bit rude, but still.
I've got 2 examples at the moment.
Yeah, it's good. And in the chat too.
Brill. I'm hoping we'll get to about 5 on Menti. All of these things on Menti are anonymous, so please don't be shy. Please press enter. Here we go. This is brilliant. Some people have gone with the grammatical approach. Some people have gone with the cutthroat approach in the sense that they've cut out a lot of the sentences. So I might pause. So enter, press enter to pause. Yep. Writing short sentences is easier to keep track of than long sentences. Next one. Some people seem to think that writing long sentences make them sound intelligent, full stop. It is actually a lot harder to keep track of everything they're saying, full stop. Therefore, shorter sentences are considered far more preferable. This one is short sentences are easier to follow than long sentences, full stop. What's this one say down here? Short sentences are better because long ones are harder to follow, even if they make you sound more intelligent, exclamation mark. I'll just continue to resume scroll, see if there's any other new ones that have come in that look slightly different.
Yeah, these are good. And so I think I mean, this just shows there is no one way of doing something. I think one of those there is actually exactly what I've written as well. So there's no one way of doing anything. And although like some people have gone the brutal route, and that's great, like the meaning is still there. Like that's the key thing. Like you are still conveying the same information, but you're doing it in a much clearer way. But even those of you who have kind of written 2 or 3 sentences, so kept it longer, the meaning is still there, and it's still a lot easier to understand rather than that one long sentence. So I hope you can see that you can go as brutal as you want, and then that's when it comes to thinking about who you're writing for and like what kind of tone of voice you want to use, and how it fits with the sentences around this sentence. All of that kind of extra stuff, you'll make those decisions. But ultimately, everybody is making this clearer. Like that one long sentence with lots going on is now clearer, with as far as I can see, whichever way you've chosen to do it.
So we've got 3 examples to share. If Ian, you can take control back of the screen, and we'll just triple check that people are going to see the right slide. There were a few technical glitches before, so people were still seeing previous slides and others were seeing the slide you were on. So let's just make sure we've got the right one. So kudos to you if you have picked the same sentence structure as our presenter, Ian. So I did see a few people actually use that. So just to check, can everyone see the screen? Can you rewrite the sentence? If you can come off mute or just write in the chat that you can see the screen, and when we go to the next one, I'll make sure you can see that as well. Yep, Aaron, brilliant. Sarah, thank you very much. So Ian, we're all good to go. Thanks, Rob.
No worries. I mean, there's no kudos for making it the same as mine, because mine isn't right. It's just a way of doing it. And actually, some of you are far more brutal than I could have expected, and taking it down to a single sentence. But here's one way of doing it. So this is very similar to some of you. So you could bring it down and still do 3 sentences, still be quite long, but actually you've separated the ideas up. So some people think that writing long sentences makes them sound clever. See there, I've changed the word intelligent for clever, because intelligent isn't the most complicated word, but clever is probably a bit simpler. But actually it's harder to keep track of what they are saying. It's another idea. Shorter sentences are better. There's your third idea. Or, slightly more brutal, long sentences are hard to understand, short sentences are better. So that's kind of my version of brutal, but some of you have gone even further still, and you convey exactly the same meaning. Sorry, not meeting, meaning. So yeah, all good, all good. Right, onwards. So use pronouns, say I, we, and you. So this is partly about being friendly and conversational and kind of the writing like a human, as it says there. It's a tone of voice thing to a degree, but it is actually also just clearer and more simple, as long as you know who the we and the you are. So it could be that I think this is the right rule, and it's a good rule to use most of the time, but it's a case of just making sure that you're clear about who the we and the you is, depending on the circumstances. But it's a way of speaking directly to the reader. Like, you are ultimately only one person is reading your writing at any given time. So you are speaking directly to that person, and therefore it is likely to be more clearer if you say you need to pay your council tax, as opposed to, what would it be? Your council tax must be paid. That would be like the passive version. Yeah, so it's about clarity, but it's also slightly about tone. Some examples. So instead of saying support is offered, I don't know why I use that voice, but let's do it again. Support is offered. Maybe that's because it sounds more posh. Instead you say we can help you. Instead of residents can vote, you just say you can vote. Instead of policies are available to read, you can read our policies. So you can see how that, over the course of lots of pages and lots of content, that kind of approach, using that more friendly kind of we and you, it starts to affect in general the way that you speak to people and the impression that they get and the tone that you use with them. It just sounds more friendly and it's clearer. Use everyday words. So again, this goes back to a little bit about what we just talked about with the planning and the housing. Use words that are familiar to people. Like, who is the audience? Who is actually going to read this? And use words that are familiar to them. So this is where it doesn't mean dumbing down. That doesn't mean that you need to just remove any kind of technical language whatsoever. If you're writing a planning document and it's for other planners, then probably it's okay to use some planning language. But you need to be sure that no one is reading that document that needs to use it and actually do something, that it's not an important document for them who won't understand those words. So use words that are familiar, that most people will understand. Write to inform and not to impress. So by that I mean, especially for a website or a council website, you're really just trying to tell people something or ask them to do something. You're not really there to show off. As much as it sort of pains me, we're not writing poetry or short stories. We are actually trying to inform people and help people do stuff. So using everyday words is okay. And believing your ideas. So again, some pushback to using everyday words is well, it just doesn't sound right. This is actually more the case in emails to people. So you will see people phrase emails in all kinds of mad ways that they wouldn't necessarily, they use words they wouldn't necessarily use. I don't know. I can't even think of an example, but
I've used perusal before.
Perusal.
For your perusal.
Yeah,
I would never say that, but I write it in emails.
Exactly. So all of this stuff that I'm saying, yes, I know that we're like building council websites, but actually, if you do some of these things like in your emails and in your messages to each other and documentation, business proposals, bids, that kind of thing, like it's good to do it like everywhere really. But believe in your ideas. So if somebody comes and says to you that, you know, this doesn't sound highfalutin enough, you need to make this more complicated. Like I say, it's not. Like the idea is strong. Like this is the important thing, is the idea. Like the idea is to get people to pay their council tax, or to whatever it might be, or to get someone to do something in an email. Like the idea is that. And like, if you believe in it and it's the right idea, then don't worry about what language you use. Everyday words are fine. Okay, here's just like an activity. Again, if we were in person, I would get you to write these down or to shout at me. But maybe we can do this in chats if we've got like a confident group who are willing to like shout some stuff out. They're not particularly complicated, but they are good examples of words that we use all the time. So does anyone to offer an alternative? Acquire. No.
Buy and get from Sarah. Jackie says get.
Yeah. Thank you, Connolly. I can't see the chat, so that's great. Okay, advise. So advise would be like, could you advise me of the time at which we must meet? That kind of thing.
What?
Tell.
Steve saying tell. Yeah, feel free to come off mute, team. Tell.
Yeah. Tell's good.
Explain.
Commence. Explain, yeah. Commence.
Start.
Exactly. I know that these sound really obvious, but how often do we write like the meeting will commence at 9 o'clock? Like I see that stuff all the time. Deliver. That's a really common one. Like we deliver stuff. I find myself using this all the time.
We've got begin.
Yeah.
Post. Sorry,
Yeah.
begin may have been the previous one.
Yeah.
I'm following
Yeah.
up on
Great. Same with facilitate. These are quite similar. So you might say you will deliver this workshop. So you could argue I'm delivering this workshop. But
there's the different ones here, Ian. There's I believe we're talking about deliver, and it's Sadie says provide, Sarah says build, George says I don't think George is talking about George says send, and William says give. I think they're all about deliver. I can't keep up on this chat.
Yeah, and that's okay. The idea really with stuff like that is if you can be specific, then be specific. So if you're like delivering a workshop, then I'm running a workshop, or I'm presenting a workshop, rather than like I'll deliver that content to you by 10 o'clock. You'll write that content, or I'll send it to you. If you can be like specific, deliver is used as like a catch-all word for like lots of stuff. Same with facilitate. Like facilitate a meeting, like you just run a meeting, or you just host a meeting, or something like that. This is like a real bugbear of mine. If you take out the words in order and just use to, I've never come across an example where that hasn't worked and it hasn't been fine. So if you look at if you can just do one thing from today, is stop saying in order to, because I imagine if you just check almost every single time, you can remove those two words and just to will be fine. So I'm going to run this meeting in order to help you learn plain English. Like I don't need in order, it's just to. Participate, I'll just shout them out for time, but participate, things like take part in. In fact, I can go to the next page. Take part in or join. Require is usually need, like I require you to complete this task by the end of the day. Say I need. Utilize, really, really common. Just use, it's use, it's the same word. The good news is, I haven't got this slide in, but basically the Plain English campaign have a list of these, and there are like hundreds of them. I've just picked out a few. It's worth, I'll see if I can find a link, but it's just a PDF, and there are hundreds of these types of words. If you can just get used to using the simpler version, it will make things so much easier and clearer for the people reading it. Okay, so this is where it gets like slightly more complicated, and this is the hardest thing to put into kind of your everyday practice. It's definitely the stuff that I found most challenging when I first started doing this kind of thing. But it's that active language thing. I think most people know now, like the idea that if you're more active, then it's clearer. I think that most people are on board with that. But it's actually, how do you do that? How do you spot passive verbs, for example? How do you know when something can be written in more actively? The reason for doing it is that it's much more clear and personal. You'll see that in the examples in a second. And the key thing is to kind of identify and look out for passive verbs and then flip them around to make them active. And another good way of, as is often the case, a good way of spotting that kind of thing is just reading your writing out loud. It becomes really clear quite quickly. So some examples. So active versus passive verbs. So an active verb is monkeys love bananas. The passive version of that is bananas are loved by monkeys. We haven't got this information on the website, although it would be great if we could find a way to squeeze it in somewhere and hope no one notices. I don't quite know.
Don't tempt it. I'm sure Stephen may do that.
I don't know which service area. Is there a zoo in Northamptonshire? Probably not. But you can see just from that very, very simple example that the second one is longer. There are 2 extra words, and it's just a bit more difficult to say. Like it's just it's quite hard to put into words, but it's just more complicated. Monkeys love bananas. Bananas are loved by monkeys. Like there's a difference. I hope you can sort of see that, even though I can't explain it. I know it's kind of my job. So okay, let's make this a bit more relevant. So the councillor won the election. The election was won by the councillor. So active version, passive version. You don't necessarily need to remember this specifically, but this is how it's working. So in almost every sentence, there are 3 main parts. There is a subject, there is a verb, and then there is an object. So in the example we've just shown, the active version, the subject is at the start, the councillor, the thing that they're doing, the verb, is that they won, and the object is the election. So the councillor won the election. The subject comes first, then the verb, and then the object. Someone is doing something to something else. You can see that the passive version, those 2 are swapped. So the object comes first and the subject comes last. So the object is the election still, and that comes first. So the election, you can see in order to make this work, we've had to include another word. So make it excuse me, we have to add the word was, so we've extended it just by flipping the object to the front. So the verb was won. I need to move the word verb underneath that bit of text, apologies. And then by the councillor, again, we've had to add an extra word for it to make sense. But what's happening is that the sentence is just being flipped. Obviously, they are very simple examples, but the principles still apply no matter how long your sentence is. And it could be that you have actually the same sentence, the same structure, the subject, verb, object, or the other way around, twice in a sentence. But in this example, slightly longer, but this is still active. After a tight race, Trevor, who lives in Daventry, and I hope that I should have checked really, I hope that isn't actually someone who won the election who lives in Daventry, won the local election and could not be happier. Like, it's a longer sentence, it's got more words around it that aren't the subject, the object, or the verb or the object, but the order is the same, so the structure is the same. Some more examples. So the passive voice is the issue will be fixed by us soon. The active is we will fix the issue soon. And you can see by making it active, we also get the opportunity to put in a pronoun too. So we use the more friendly we. The typo was spotted by the proofreader. The proofreader spotted the typo. The form must be completed. You must complete the form. So that last example is the kind of thing that will pop up all over the council websites. We're asking people to do something. So rather than saying the form must be completed or, you know, the the policies can be found at, you can find the policies. So it's just swapping that sentence around, making it active. It changes the tone and the sentence becomes shorter and simpler. Some examples of when passive is kind of okay. I wouldn't say all of these examples are okay, but they are some of them are techniques, whereas others are when you don't have any choice. So the first one, when there is no doer, you don't really have a choice. So if you don't know who the subject is, then you can't include them. I suppose in this example you could put the awful people. That could be the subject, but you don't know who the subject is, so you can't use it. So instead of that, you would say the traffic lights in Corby Town Centre were stolen. An absolute awful occasion. I hope that hasn't happened. So that's where there is no doer, no subject. You could also do it to soften it up a bit. So this might be something that we do with the council website, where we need to just kind of soften things up. Where being really firm and using that kind of really plain active voice, actually it just sounds a bit wrong. Like, there is a lot of this where you just need to use your intuition. It might just sound like a bit harsh or a bit uncomfortable. So you might say, the fee must be paid in full, as opposed to you must pay the fee. That's the difference. Obviously, a very common one, sorry, not sorry. mistakes were made. This is like a very famous, the most famous example of like a passive verb. Instead of saying sorry for something, we're sorry for what we did. You might have noticed this in from politicians. You'll say, well, mistakes were made. But it can also be used to shift attention. I don't know if we're going to need to use this on the council websites, but if you kind of don't want to, if you want to kind of shift attention away from what's actually going on, you might say councillor bitten by a squirrel, when really the focus should be on the fact that the squirrel bit the councillor. But if you put him at the end of the sentence, it almost sounds like it was a positive thing to do. Okay, we're going through this. Does anyone have any questions about that, actually? Because that's probably a good place to ask for questions.
Ian, there's a question, but I think we'll end from Jackie, and I'll bring it up, but I think we'll wait till before the review part of the exercise, because there might be a little bit more discussion on it.
Okay. Okay, headings and lists. So this is another I have already talked about this, but this is a really important part of that idea that writing and content design, plain English, whichever bit of it, that it's not just about the words, it's actually about information. It's the way you present information. So if you have a page of content and you decide it's got to be writing, we need to write this in plain English. It can't be an infographic or an image or a video. We're going to write some good old-fashioned text. Then by putting headings in and lists, it just breaks down that information and makes it easier to read, frankly, and also to scan. So if we're talking about content that's for the web, if you come to the page and it kind of just looks nicer, it's a very simple way of thinking about it, but if it kind of just looks more palatable, then that's great. But also it could be that someone comes and actually they only need one piece of information and it's down there in like the 4th or 5th paragraph, but they wouldn't know that unless there was a heading that allow them to see it. So if it was something like apply for apply for benefit, I'm just making this up, like if it was like apply for benefits and that was your heading, it could be that there is like lots of information under that. It's a complex thing. So it could be that there is a subheading that is eligibility, and when someone comes to that, if that's all the information they want, am I eligible to apply for benefits, they can go straight to that piece of information rather than saying, okay, where is it on this page? I'm on the right page, but whereabouts is it? So using headings for that kind of thing is great. It allows you to structure your page, and be descriptive as you can. So this goes for links as well, which is quite common. That's a slightly different topic, but to always try and be descriptive and meaningful. So although eligibility is just one word, like it describes what's underneath it. It describes what's to come. So try not to be clever. Try not to be like, this is not necessarily the opportunity for your best jokes in headings. Really, we're just trying to help people get to what they need to get to. So being descriptive is the way to go. Give instructions, another principle of plain English. I think sometimes we can be a bit reticent, not a plain English word, reluctant to just say what we mean. Like if we want somebody to do something, then sometimes we can kind of talk around the houses. And again, if we think about our emails and our Slack messages and our Teams messages or whatever it might be, even our bids, funding bids, that kind of thing, we end up like talking around it. Like quite a lot of the time, we can just say what we mean, just like give that instruction. Particularly on a council website, people just want to do something, so they want to get from either one page to another, or they want to take some kind of action. So just go straight to the point. Don't worry about all the filler words around it. Just get to it and get them where they need to go. And don't be afraid to give instructions and be bossy. So instead of saying the document should be downloaded, just say download the document. And again, you can see that the way we do that and with the way that we make this into more of an instruction is by making it active. So instead of the document should be downloaded, it's download the document. So just switching the sentence around. Users can read the guidelines. Complaints must be sent to Ian at the Internet. You can just say email ian@theinternet.com to complain. Yeah, hopefully that makes sense. These it's quite simple, quite straightforward, but it is easy to kind of go away from this and just and forget and go back into like old habits. It takes quite a while to remember that actually we can just tell people what we want, as long as you're polite. But if it's on the internet, if it's an email, you might want to say, oh, please, could you just do this? But if it's on the internet, you don't really need to be polite. I don't think that someone who wants to, pay their council tax really wants you to kind of, please go here to pay your council tax. Just tell them. They just want to get stuff done. Okay, the last part that I want to talk about, and there could be much more to this, is kind of the review part of the content design process.
Quickly, Ian, before we jump in.
Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot that.
No, that's okay. So I've got a question, and I think more people may have some comments. So David's actually already responded, but good to get your and other people on the calls thoughts on it. So I'm just scrolling up on the chat. Bear with me 1 second. I think I passed it. Yes, I have. But Jackie, you had the table and you were sharing, and I think I've shared the right link to the free resource by Plain English campaign, where you have that table saying advise and in order to and all that kind of thing. So that's when the question came up, and it says, so are you meaning that the website should be like talking to someone rather than a source of information? And then David responded, I'll jump in as Ian can't see the chat, but I'd say vast majority of the time that is correct. We're keen to back this up too. If you spot anything on the Unitary website you think could be written more clearly or concisely, please let us know. So it's just, I think, thinking back to that slide, are we saying, or are you saying that you'd recommend the website be kind of informative and talking rather than a source of information? Because Jackie mentioned she's a little bit worried about making it too informal or chatty.
Yep, I get that, because it's a council website, and there is this sense that we're the council. We need to be super professional, and we're not best mates with everyone. I get that, but I don't think the two things need to be mutually exclusive. I think that you can talk to people clearly. I mean, it's about clarity rather than being informal. Is what I would say. So you can still get the same information across. So if you're a source of information, this is really about how you get the information across, isn't it? So I don't think it's like you're either providing information or you are being informal and chatty. It's more about how you get that information to people. And the idea of being using plain English is less about the tone, which is what I would say like a word like informal would relate to. It's more about clarity. So do people understand what they need to do? Is this information getting to them? And what can we do to make it clearer? And in most cases, using these guidelines will do that job. So I don't think the two things need to be mutually exclusive. But like I think I said, there does have to be a bit of, and this is where the content design comes into it, where you kind of go, okay, like what do I really need to do for this particular page or this particular piece of content? And Stephen and David in particular are going to be making these decisions all the time. So it could be on some pages where you go, do you know what, that tone is just not quite right. It's a bit like where did I just say it? Things like the fee must be paid in full. The idea of softening it up. That's an example of where you might prefer to just write it in a slightly different way, because you don't want to come across as well too informal or too chatty around payments and that kind of thing. But ultimately the principle is about clarity and less about tone. I think as long as if you can convey the information as clearly as possible, that's great. And then it's about using your kind of skill and experience and intuition to go, okay, have we got the right tone for this? Like, you can those things don't need to be separate from each other. I don't know if that answers the question.
Does anyone else have any other comments about that question? Great question. Thank you for bringing that up. Or any other questions in general? Feel free to come off mute or pop it in the chat, and Fiona and I can read them aloud.
No more questions in the chat.
Okay. Well, it looks like we're going to finish earlier anyway, so we could always have some questions at the end too. And a lot of what we've just talked about will be written up into guidelines. So if you're likely to be working with the web team on content for your service area, then we're going to have guidelines with this kind of stuff in there. So with more detail, obviously, than it's just me rambling on here. So we will provide, as a web team, we are going to provide that kind of guidance on how to do some of this stuff, where it's more specific probably to the sites in Northants. Okay, so the last part of the process is the idea of reviewing it. Here we go. So the idea is that you don't, again, just making the comparison to something like a traditional copywriter who writes a piece of, answers a brief, writes something, passes it back and probably never sees it again. And often that content will sit on a website forever until somebody notices that it's out of date, or that it's kind of written in not the right way, not the right tone for how the organization has changed, all that kind of thing. So again, the idea with content design is there is this kind of loop where you do your research, you work out what people need, you create the content, you publish it, and then you test it and review it and work out whether it's right, and then when you're going to review it again, so it comes back around. So it's the idea that nothing is ever really final, even if it's published. Yep, it's on the site and it'll be there for a while, I'm sure, but it's the idea that at some point it gets reviewed again and it's in a constant process. But what do you review it against? So again, going back to those performance indicators. So if you're aiming to like improve the amount of visits to a page, for example, and it's not working out, like it's not happened, then you can review against that and decide whether you need to go back and start the process again. Feedback. So we're doing user testing. We're doing lots of user testing. That's probably our primary way of reviewing the content on the websites, the 2 websites. So we could get feedback there and make changes based on what people are saying to us, and then analytics and data. So just checking against like the hard evidence really when we're reviewing, and making changes that we know are based on the same kind of principles that we had at the start. One of the things that is great to do, that isn't always the time, it's quite often the kind of thing that will drop off when people are busy. But even if it's just within the web team itself, even if it's just like David and Stephen sharing with each other, or with Richard, or the Steve and the BAs that are on the project, just the idea that yes, it could be that one person writes the content or puts it together for a particular page, but on those particularly on those most important pages, those priority pages, that you just get everyone together, maybe for a quick 15 minutes or even like half an hour, and you do a content crit, which is just basically getting everyone in the same place and going, right, what do we think? And is this doing the job? And the kind of questions you would ask is like, does this meet the user need in the best possible way? Are the facts correct? Obviously very important. And could this be better in any way? And this is a time where you kind of just like leave your ego. It's not proofreading, it's really looking at the content. Leave the egos at the door, appreciate that people are doing their best in the time that they have, and just say, okay, what do we think before this goes live? Or even after it's published, to be honest. Anytime it's good. And doing it this way, where you get people together, this is as opposed to just sending it to maybe like one person or just keeping it to yourself, is that you get to like make changes quite quickly. Like if lots of people are there, all the important people can agree. You don't have to go, okay, now I need to send it to someone else, and Trevor, the counsellor, needs to sign this off. If you can get people in the room at the same time, you can like make decisions quickly. And yeah, so you involve that wider team and experts. So if for some reason this is like a subject matter expert piece of content where you've got someone who really knows what they're doing, maybe it's the planning officer, something like that, where you've got details that actually someone who knows what they're talking about needs to be here, and if you can get them involved in that, again, it saves those endless emails and like sending stuff around, all that kind of thing. But it also takes people with you, so like people are involved in the process. So our aim is to work closely with people in service areas on all of the content as much as possible, so that you are part of the process, and you're on board and you know what's happening throughout, and can work with the web team to kind of make those decisions and review content. What we're doing mostly, and I'm not going into a lot of detail with this, I think Ale might have talked about this as well, obviously in her session, but the best way of improving content is to actually show it to people. So actually show it to those users, those people who are going to be affected most by it. So this is the kind of thing that we're doing most. So we already have done lots of user testing to get the websites to where they are now. And our intention is to, when we're working with service areas and we've got content, and particularly on important journeys, things that we know are like important, maybe things like transactions, that kind of thing, that we then carry user testing out on those specific things, that we show them people remotely. We've been doing it remotely, obviously, and it's worked fine, to try and find out where there are problems, where we can change things, and try and understand how people actually use the content and how they interact with it. Again, analyzing that data. So once we've done that, if we do that with lots of people, we can start to look at trends and see how people are affected by it and what are the common problems. Collect feedback, so things that people actually say, and then we have to make decisions. So the last bit is change and improve, but really it's about, and again, this is the idea of, if you're a content designer, you're constantly thinking about, okay, what is the right thing to do? It's about decision making as much as it is about writing or anything like that. So it's looking at that feedback that comes from a user testing session and going, which ones, which bits of feedback will matter, which are the ones that are they all matter, but which are the priority ones, where can we actually make changes that will improve things, and to go through and make those decisions and change content at that point based on that feedback. I was a bit rambly, sorry.
Ian,
yes.
Just a quick one. I know for other councils who may be short of time or of resource, one of the key things, rather than kind of speaking with the residents, I guess the next best thing would be to chat to your colleagues in the call centres who deal with complaints, to kind of see what are the key issues that people are having. So I don't know, Ian, if you've got any examples where you've used that, or what your thoughts are of that approach.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, just use whatever you can. I would say that's it's not very scientific, but that sounds like as good a way as any. If that's the data that you have, then to use it. A project I worked on with a digital inclusion charity, we used surveys quite a lot. So they already had we wanted to test a specific thing, and they already had a survey that went out to 100,000 people. So we just included questions in there. And we use that data. I mean, that was with users, but yeah, anything that you can get your hands on is useful. But yeah, as you just said, it's trying to balance the limitations of any project. No project is limitless in terms of time and money and resources and all that kind of thing. So yeah, that sounds like a perfectly good way of doing it. And that's it, really. Content design is an ongoing process. So I've already kind of just said that it's kind of non-stop. You constantly go through the loop, and once you've reviewed a piece of content, at some point you're going to have to go back and do it all again. I say this though, knowing that the websites that we're talking about in Northants are 1,000 pages over 2 websites, and so it's hard. And these are the kinds of things that we're going to have to try and build into a much longer term process. We're going to have to think about, okay, so once we've got everything on the websites, the 2 websites, at what point do you then go back and start again? Which is not a thought that I think that anyone on the web team really wants to think about right now. But that's the idea, that it's a constant process, constant loop of discovery, and then creating content, and then reviewing it, and then back, which is fun. And that's it. I shall stop sharing my screen so that I feel like I'm talking to people. I assume that there are people still there.
Yes, I think you've got over 36 people are still here. So Jackie has just said a really important thing, and thanks, Mike, for coming on video. It means that you want to chat next. So Jackie's just said it's really important to know that website isn't just about external users, which you're 100% right. When people say users, often people just think of residents, but it's also potentially, if you're doing an intranet project, which I know is something that you have all potentially gone through, and the intranet is all about the staff. So there's definitely more than one user group. In the most part, it isn't just staff and it isn't just residents. So you do need to make sure that you are catering for all users. Mike, how are you? Have you got a question to ask, Mike? You're all right? Anybody else have other questions? Sarah's asked, I'd like to see more work on ensuring staff know what's on the website and use it. I don't I think a lot of colleagues don't use the content we produce. It should be part of all staff inductions to read the relevant websites and get feedback on clarity. Thanks, Lily, for joining us. She's got to jump to another meeting. If anyone else has to jump for an 11 o'clock, thank you for your time. And we will still be here till 11:15 if you want to stay on and ask any questions. Otherwise, the next Lunch and Learn is at lunchtime, and it's all about prototyping. And I believe that is after the bank holiday in mid-June. So if you're interested to join another Lunch and Learn, hopefully you learned something in this Breakfast and Learn all about content, feel free to reach out to Juliet or Fiona or Richard, who are on the call now, and they'll make sure you get the invite. Thanks so much for joining. Hi, David. Do you want to jump in? How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. I was just trying to follow the questions. The problem with Teams is
it goes so fast, doesn't it?
Yeah. I was just picked up on what Sarah asked about being kept in touch with something, with ensuring the staff know what's on the website, basically. I think that's definitely important. In the past, in the county, we had a weekly communication tool that comms looked after called Informer that went out to all staff, and we used that to basically communicate website updates. But now that we haven't got that anymore, we're kind of interested to know how people want to kind of keep in touch with web updates, really, because that's an important channel that we've lost. So yeah, we'd just be interested to know what people think would be a useful way of receiving that information about website updates. And I'm just looking at some of the other stuff. Yeah, and can come and talk to us about writing strategy documents. We'd welcome that, definitely.
Yeah, it's definitely, like, I think I said this enough, but it's, yes, yeah, we happen to be like building a couple of websites, but the plain English stuff especially is like applies to anything really. Strategy documents, policies, stuff that people need to get information from.
David, can you remind Charlotte and the team on the call where they can send accessible Word docs to be made PDF accessible, please?
Yeah, mainly for content updates, sort of page updates and things like that, it's best to use the form that's available through the intranet page. But sometimes if you've got documents that you want to send through to be made accessible, then they might be too big for the form to handle. So it's just webteam@westnorthants.gov.uk or webteam@northnorthants.gov.uk.
Ian, I have a little bit of a side question, just because I know we've got a mix of people on the call. When speaking with Fiona, we've got people from transformation, some people from marketing and comms. So I've got a bit of an angled question about social media. And David, please feel free for both of you to share your knowledge with us. But what do you think the key differences in, I guess, creating content or content design or copywriting for social media versus, say, a website blog article or a press release?
Both waiting for each other to answer first.
Well, I've not on this project, but I've previously argued that some of the stuff that we talked about, like the principles of content design, it's not really that complicated. It's just like make sure that what you're doing is actually people actually want it. I mean, that's ultimately, like, I could have saved us all a lot of time and just said that, I suppose. But like the same applies to social media and like the comms work. Like I've done loads of comms stuff in previous lives, and you know, with social and with I guess more like newsy type stuff, we feel there's more freedom to be creative, I suppose, because if I use that term loosely, because I don't think that plain English is not creative, but I think that as long as you are what you're doing is, it's still a service, like providing social media, particularly for a council, like you're still providing a service. You still want people to do stuff. So the principles of like just checking before you publish anything or write anything is whether it's what people typically want or what they typically like like literally like to like or to click on or to retweet or whatever it might be, share on Facebook. Like that's just stuff that like exists. Like you can find that stuff out and you can test that stuff in the same way that you can test a page on paying your council tax. So some of those principles, and I guess I would say that, but like some of those principles can still apply to comms work, rather than just saying, okay, this is where I put on my beret and get my quill and start, you know, getting all fancy. The boring like data stuff still applies. In fact, more so. Like social media, there's more data available, really.
Guys, I'm just gonna stop the recording. Thank you very much. I just have to wrap the recording up, but you carry on, and it's been really useful. Thank you.
Just going to pick up on that question from Chris about local government websites being scored on use of planing.